Hello, everyone, and welcome to the keynote speech of the 2024 International eConference on Holocaust Studies. And we have with us the very well-renowned Dr. Stephen Smith. He's a respected figure in the fields of oral history, genocide studies, and innovative memory preservation technologies. His career is marked by numerous groundbreaking initiatives and leadership roles. Dr. Smith served for 12 years as Executive Director of USC Shoah Foundation, the archive founded by Steven Spielberg to document the Holocaust and global genocides. He currently holds the position of USC Visiting Professor of Religion, focusing his research on genocide-related testimony. Most recently, Dr. Smith co-founded Memory Workers, adding to his impressive roster of innovative projects. He is also the co-founder of Storyfile, the world's first AI conversational video platform, which continues to revolutionize how we preserve and interact with human experiences. As an international speaker, the documentary film producer, and the oral historian, specializes in immersive media. Dr. Smith has gained global recognition for his work and his contributions to the award-winning Dimension
They finally got a call.
project,
That's what Pretty's going to do.
which can be experienced in select museums worldwide, have been particularly impactful. His expertise extends to practical applications of memory preservation. Dr. Smith was the project director for the development of the Kigali Genocide Memorial. As an author, he has published several books, including The Holocaust and the Christian World 2016, Never Again, Yet Again 2019, The Trajectory of Holocaust Memory 2023. His work uniquely combines his theological background with cutting-edge technology to preserve and share the stories of the Holocaust and genocide survivors. And in recognition of his significant contributions, he has been honored as a member of the Order of the British Empire. We are so honored to have you with us, Dr. Smith, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Berta, and welcome to the Ackerman Center. We're so happy to have you here. I've been following Mahat Berta's career for the last few years, and it's just a pleasure to see you there and doing this work and convening this conference. Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, Alex and John and Angel and George and Atai and Rebecca. It's a pleasure to see you all, meet you all, know you all. I'm going to spend the next 30 or 40 minutes just sort of high level, taking a look at what I entitled, I'm going to share a screen with you here, entitled The Future of Holocaust Memory. Let's do this. I think if I do that, we should be in the right spot. The Future of Our Past, Holocaust Education in 2024. I actually first gave a lecture entitled Holocaust Education in 2024 around about 20 years ago. And I can tell you that this is going to be completely different content, which makes the point of, we want to start from the end of the point that I am here to make, is that we actually don't know what Holocaust education will be in 2025, 2045, but we know that it'll be different to what we think, but that it will definitely come around. And so what we're going to be doing today is looking at what I call trajectories and seeing what the trajectories have been to date and how those trajectories might unfold in the future. I've tried to do this in relationship to the title of the conference, which I think I have here somewhere, Rebooting Holocaust Remembrance, Navigating the Intersection of Technology, Memory, and Human Rights. And so I took you at your word, Ackerman Center, and said, okay, let's have a look. What will it be like to reboot Holocaust Remembrance, navigating the intersection of technology, memory, and human rights, if that's the task that we have been given at this particular conference? I'm just going to go back a little if I can. Oh, I can't. Hang on a second. It's not allowing me to do that. Give me a tick. And we'll go back here and review. So in order to be able to understand a little bit about 2045, I want us to go back to 1945, actually to the 21st of April, 1945 at Bergen-Belsen, where we might have seen this.
Heute ist der 24. April 1945. Mein Name ist Hella Goldstein. Ich erzähle mein Überleben, was ich überleben habe in der Lage Bergenwalde.
So actually, I was inaccurate there. I said April 21st, 24, 24th of April, 1945. That's 9 days after the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. Let me just play that again, just pause it. So here we have this young woman. Her name is Hella Goldstein. We learn from this clip. In fact, I found this clip because I was looking for something else. We were going to be making an interactive holographic interview with Anita Lasker-Wallfisch from London, and I knew that she'd been interviewed on this same day by somebody somewhere, and so I was looking through the British Movie Tone for her interview when I came across this. Hella Goldstein introduces herself, gives us the date and her name, and then tells us that she's going to describe what happened on the day that she was liberated from Bergen-Belsen. You can see in front of her is a microphone, and behind her is a mass grave. Now, this is an unusual piece of footage, and when I first discovered it, I realized I was probably looking at the very first Holocaust survivor testimony in audiovisual format. A camera, a microphone, and a testimony. The testimony is 93 seconds long, and during the testimony, Hella describes what happens the day the British came in, and thanks the British and thanks God for her liberation, and describes very briefly what the conditions were like the day that she was found. So when I saw this, I went, oh, Hella Goldstein, if this is the first Holocaust testimony, I wonder if she's still alive. And so I went to the Shoah Foundation archive. For many years, I was the director there, and I typed in Hella Goldstein. Important fact here, metadata. We always think about content. Most important thing that we have in all of our archives is metadata. And so I searched the metadata and typed in Hella Goldstein. Lo and behold, it brought me to a file of somebody called Helen Collin in Houston, Texas. So I called Mary Lee Wiebeck, who was working at the time at the Houston Holocaust Center, and asked her, do you know Helen Collin? She goes, Holocaust survivor? Yeah. I said, is she still alive? She said, well, she was going to hospice. Let me find out what happened. She called back half an hour later. It turns out that Helen Collin had been to hospice to get some pain medication and was back home. So I jumped on a plane and I went to visit Helen Collin and played her the clip I just played you and said, remember this? To which she said, well, of course I remember that. I said, what was going through your mind when you were standing there in front of that mass grave? And she said, I thought I was going to die. And I said, you thought you were going to die? Why? And she said, well, you're seeing the mass grave behind me, but in fact, my view across that microphone was to a line of SS who the British had lined up, and I was talking to them about my liberation from Bergen-Belsen and to the camera and the microphone. So I said, if you thought you were going to die, why did you do it? And she said, because I thought that telling the story was worth dying for. Turns out Hella Goldstein, Helen Collin, and I shared a birthday, 15th of April, which was also the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. She was liberated on her 21st birthday. We made great friends that day, and she died 4 weeks later. I tell you that story because the trajectory of Holocaust memory that propels us forward to 2045 begins in this very moment of history. In other words, this is where we are rooted. And Hella Goldstein's testimony still has the same efficacy today as it did then. Okay, let's use that as a fundamental just to get started. So if I say that, then how can we possibly reboot Holocaust remembrance? Because clearly there's not very much to reboot, because in fact, the history is what the history is. and we're not going to change that. So then what is it that we're actually navigating? So 2007, Paul Ricoeur was reflecting on the epistemology of the historical sciences. He came up with a very simple format. That the first thing there is in this epistemology is testimony and the record of testimonies. And he's not talking specifically about Holocaust here. He's talking generally about how history and then knowledge of the past is formed. Testimony and a record of the testimonies, followed by a questioning of the records, following by a written representation of the past. Actually, it's a really simple formula. Record, analyze, represent. Would it be that it was so simple? In what I call the trajectory of Holocaust memory, I don't look at it in such a simple format. There are blocks of time. In 1945, we were dealing with aftermath. The very moment that we see Hella Goldstein there, survival is the thing. She didn't know whether she was going to survive that interview. Testimony becomes the thing. Everyone talks about the silence of the witnesses. Did you know there were nearly 8,000 testimonies taken in 1945 and 1946? And that wasn't just the oral histories, the audio histories that were taken by David, his name was David, in 1946. In fact, the survivors themselves had a flurry of activity to go and scour the entire European continent for testimonies, many of which are still at Yad Vashem today. The documents that emerged that were necessary for the trials that occurred, the emergence of Israel and the ongoing kind of, I'm calling it repatriation here. Of course, for many survivors, it wasn't repatriation. It was a new kind of patriation to new places. And so the aftermath was all-consuming. But slowly we start to get memory emerging, memoirs, documentary, museums, and popular culture, followed by education, formalizing that memory into the way in which we teach future generations through curriculum and programs, and organizations that are formed, and teacher education programs, and then trips to sites once the Cold War is over. And then we start to apply that in the contemporary world in relationship to contemporary events. Bosnia occurs, Rwanda occurs. We try comparative studies and try to make sense of it in the present. Then, as we're starting to see now in the application of this memory in the present, I've got a title here called Self-Help, the proliferation of self-help books and self-help insights from Holocaust survivors like Dr. Edith Eger are reflecting in a new way on what that past means in the present. The emergence of fiction. We've had fictionalized accounts, but fiction of the Holocaust in the living memory of Holocaust survivors, to me, is quite an interesting phenomenon that's occurring. And then the online presence, fast-growing online presence of Holocaust memory of those who went through it and those who are applying it to their channels. And so it's kind of a runaway train of memory that we can't even get a hold of right now because, in fact, its proliferation through a variety of channels means that the Holocaust is being interpreted at a grassroots individual level by any who will it. And so what we end up with is this arc of history, which now projecting it forward to 2045 in what we might call post-memory, is the mythologization of the Holocaust, the historicization of the Holocaust, that is the grappling between mythology and history, scholarship, which we're engaged in on this particular call today, the real-time application of its meaning in contemporary society, its politicization and manipulation from folks on all sides of the political spectrum, which has been going on a while, but that's different once you're now into post-memory, and what people call fatigue, or at least, should we say, the familiarity with the Holocaust such that we are either walking away from it or misrepresenting it or assuming that we can represent it in ways that are maybe not consistent with the history itself. Just a few complications. So I work with something called a Holocaust memory dynamics model. I'm going to take you through it very quickly. And essentially what I see is 5 different areas. There is documentation and archives over time. So initially, there was a high degree of documentation and archival work post 1945, which then drops off and declines rapidly after the war crimes trials end. Then grows again significantly post-Cold War in the 1990s, and then flattens off more in the 2000s, followed by historical issues around historical accuracy. What we see there is a slow decline over time. First thing is, though, we don't really know what this is. We have to then establish the historical truth, and then we have to document it. Testimonies are created to create a baseline of factual memory, but still mythologization settles in. And so the historical accuracy is not that there isn't historical work, and research will come to in a second, but it's how it's interpreted in the present. Then there's memory relevance. That fluctuates with social and political changes. As we'll see in just a moment, you cannot speak about something in society without society reflecting back what that past is in relationship to its present. That creates a tension between the present and the past. Historical research, many of us are involved in that. It was pretty dormant in the first 15 years, not entirely, but slow. Then there was steady growth, then there was an acceleration in the 90s, and then there's continued expansion. And in fact, the fact that there are now so many courses and scholarships and programs is a good thing for historical research, because that provides the academic foundation for memory work. But that is in relationship to all of the other things and is not independent of it. And then there are tension peaks. That's gaps between the historical accuracy of how we report it and the contemporary interpretation. There are moments in time when there are periods where memory work requires careful navigation as we interpret the past in the context of the present. So Holocaust memory is actually a dynamic system. It responds to documentation and memory work and scholarship and societal changes, and is not independent of all of those things. So if we were to look at what that looks like, we might see this in the context of the Ricoeur model, as we're going to record and document, then we're going to analyze, which is where we get our historical research and our tension peaks, and then we're going to represent that, but with historical accuracy, with varying amounts of historical accuracy and attention with memory relevance. But what we see is that actually those three things are not in that neat little flow that Ricoeur put down. In fact, they're in tension with one another, because as we try to analyze the historical document in the context of the tension peaks in society, representations are railing against that, or at least trying to find their own form within society. And we have to understand that those things, when they are in tension, if we don't recognize that tension, we can wonder why things get confusing. Like that. So this is a representation, a very high level representation of what's happened with those 5 tracks of within the dynamic of Holocaust memory. So on the one hand, you've got, if we just go from the bottom here, documentation, which goes up and then down and then goes along, and then in the 90s goes up and then it sinks back and then it grows slowly. In relation to that, you've got memory relevance, which to start with, it's not particularly relevant to anything except World War II. And then over time, it gets applied to all kinds of things. And you get to the mid-1990s and you get genocide occurring in Rwanda and Bosnia. It takes a peak and then it dips again. And then there's more contemporary issues that are going on now in the world, and it takes a little rise again. And the Holocaust is sort of being applied in different ways. But meanwhile, the blue line, the facticity of the Holocaust, is slowly sinking towards mythology down here from more facticity. There's very little tension about the Holocaust to start with, because nobody's really paying much attention to it. And until such time as you get into the 1980s, and then you get all of this flurry of activity around creating memorials, and then the Cold War. And you see here, if anybody was confused in the 1980s and 90s, you know why, because there's a lot of change taking place. And that includes historical research, which is slow to start with, and then takes a massive bump. Actually, Christine Maxwell, thanks in large part to your mother and others like her, who were able to really accelerate our historical research. But here's the kicker. If we're around here now, The truth of the matter is, we have no idea what's going to happen in the next 20 years. These lines here are just projected out, presuming that things are going to stay more or less in the same vein, which we know they are not. So the question is then for us involved in the field is, how do we not only anticipate but participate in the crafting of these narratives or this understanding of memory, particularly in the post-memory phase of this work, as indeed by the time we get to 2045, Holocaust survivors will virtually not be part of our ongoing conversation. And then we throw into the mix a small little thing, the AI revolution. And in terms of how we predict what's going to happen with those lines as we project them out for the next 20 years, if we think that we can avoid the AI revolution, we have another thing coming. Because in fact, it has finally arrived and it will indeed impact, well, everything, including Holocaust memory and education. And so I thought I'd spend a few minutes just exploring some of that, in particular my own perspectives on it. First thing is, if you think that this is new, it's not. In fact, we can trace the current developments in mass media and the application of AI to our society to the origins of human conscience. At that time, we were just grappling with how to tell a story. And I'm going to focus this mainly on how AI intersects with narrative and storytelling in particular. In the same way that Sidney Bernstein grabbed a microphone and put it together with a camera to film Hella Goldstein, thereby creating a new paradigm of media for this historical, this history that we study. I'm interested in this particular section of my talk to talk about how AI, in much the same way as if we grab that and put it at the disposal of narrative and storytelling, where do we end up? So, okay, we've been telling stories for 35,000 years. In this case, we know there's an animal and we know there's humans involved. We don't know what the story is, but it's an illustration of how one person can tell a story, in this case, to their tribe or to a group of people, either about a myth to do with this animal or maybe to do with hunting or something similar. But this is the first form of documented mass human communication and storytelling. As time goes on, rulers figured out, okay, now we've got writing systems. If we begin to communicate with our society, in this particular case with this cuneiform, we can communicate about how society should behave. And this was the beginnings of using mass communication to create a legal structure, or at least some kind of societal norms in terms of societal behaviors, in which mass communication became the way from a ruler to talk to their entire society. And then we learned to print. Of course, the Europeans think that all happened in 1440, but the Chinese have been doing that for a couple of thousand years before that, figuring out how to communicate on a mass basis using printed materials so that everyone could have access to knowledge. Then came the theatres, and Thomas Edison and his 1,000 patents, one of them was the movie camera in 1893. Creators could then send their creations to theatres, and then broadcast television in the 1940s, which, by the way, was invented in 1897. So one of the things that we're noticing here is that the ideas that we have, there's a lag time between the idea and its application. Bear that in mind as we talk about the trajectory of memory here. What we think we can do and what we actually can do sometimes take time to get to. But now creators could talk to millions of people. And then there were intelligent machines. Steve Jobs has been credited with the iPhone. Actually, that's quite wrong, because it was Alan Turing that invented the iPhone. In his 1948 paper, Intelligent Machinery, he had the preposterous idea that there should be robots that would roam the countryside gathering data, because he posited that artificial intelligence was not about computation, it was about the lack of data and metadata. And in fact, his idea was if we could just find some kind of robot that would rove the countryside and collect data, then once there was enough data, we could create truly intelligent machines. He suggested that robot would need to have eyes, camera. It would need to have ears, a microphone. It would need to have a mouthpiece, a speaker, and it would need to have some kind of database storage device. Well, that's your device that you've got in your pocket right now. So that meant that when Mr. Jobs came along and wanted to build a smartphone, it was pretty easy then for Dr. Turing's ideas to come into fruition. Because finally, we are those robots wandering around the countryside gathering data every single day. Now, you might think this is not pertinent to what we're talking about with Holocaust education. Nothing could be more pertinent to what we are talking about, because every single person that we want to reach on this planet is carrying one of those devices. They are gathering data, they are sharing data, and they are part of the computational future and the future of AI. And for those of you that fear it, you have good reason to fear it, but put that fear to one side, because if we can harness this, Holocaust education in 2045 is going to be completely different to how we experience it today, if we harness it. Actually, talking about time, it's worth going back a little bit further in time to a gentleman by the name of Thomas Bayes. Now, Thomas Bayes was a clergyman living in Britain at the time, and was a little suspicious about the resurrection of Christ. Now, he couldn't say too much about that at the time, because that would have been a heresy. But he did come up with a very useful little formula, today known as the Bayes theorem, which he left on his desk when he died in 1761. Unfortunately, his good friend knew that he was a well-reputed mathematician and got this little formula published. It's an important little formula, because every single thing that you do in your life today comes from this, more or less. I've had a long association with Christine Maxwell from the time that she was in the early days of the internet, and my eyes popped out of my head when she told me in somewhere around about, I don't know, 1993, I don't know when it was, Christine, that whoever wins search will win the internet. I'll remember that for the rest of my life, because I thought, what is she talking about, and how can I know more about it? What I didn't know at the time was this little formula was behind everything, and still remains behind everything that you compute on your AIs today, because this enables us to check the probability that a fact is true, more or less. It drives most of what you do on a daily basis. Now, why do I tell you that? Because we are living in an age of counterfact. Everyone's worried about deep fakes, they're worried about misrepresentations, and they're worried about the way in which facts can be twisted, and indeed they all can be. But there is also a way for us to harness technology for enable us to not only verify facts, but to also be able to create together a new set of communication tools which will enable these vast archives that we have and that we worry about and that we don't know how to read and we don't know what to do with them, to be able to put them to good use for Holocaust education in the future. And when you're doing that, which you will do in the next few years, just remember this guy and his formula, because he's going to be behind it. AI stands for artificial intelligence. Just bear in mind that the key word being there is artificial intelligence. And in fact, we do have reason to worry, because, of course, anything that's artificial, we need to be very careful about how we utilize that. But I want to give a couple of examples of work that I've been doing that tests how we use artificial intelligence and deploys it in Holocaust education in constructive ways. Let's just go here for a second.
It's a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. It's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia.
Obviously,
this is a dangerous time.
Whoops. Obviously, Barack Obama minds his P's and Q's, and we know from that that was not Barack Obama driving the other character, but the other way around. Such is the nature today of AI, that tools to do that goes back a good number of years. The tools to do that are more or less on every desktop. And for those of us that are concerned about the misuse of Holocaust education and the deep faking of Holocaust denial, we need to be alert to the fact that these tools exist. But they don't create anything other than uncertainty and fear and mistrust. And if we operate on the basis of that, then we're not going to be able to move forward with harnessing these tools. In other words, if our field, those of us who are academicians, and I know all of us on here, work in the world of academia, it's our job to be critical. It's our job to question and second guess and to really look at the sources carefully. I know we had a session on ethics and to look at the ethics of AI and so forth. But if we only focus on that, then we won't actually harness it to be able to use it in ways that could be really constructive. Because for every technology that has a downside, there's an upside too. Let me talk a bit about dimensions of testimony. I know that Alex Kaur shared the outcome of that with his wonderful mother, Eva Kaur, and of blessed memory, who, so loved getting to know through this project in some detail. I'm going to take a hop, skip, and a jump through it, though. First of all, Erica Hall talks about the fact that conversation is not a new interface. It's the oldest interface. In other words, conversation has been the source of human knowledge, and in fact, we are hardwired to learn from one another. The internet is, just a blink of an eye old. The use of, writing systems is only a few thousand years old, but we have been communicating with one another for tens of thousands of years through conversation and passing down the knowledge from one generation to the next through questions and answers. That's how we interact with one another and have for millennia, says Erica. 2009, Heather Mayo, is now these days my wife, at the time was not, was having a conversation with me at the end of her day. She said to me, I interviewed Rose today. In fact, that was the day she interviewed her in this image. And she said, when I switched off the camera and we went into the kitchen and we were making tea and I was talking to her over the kitchen table, I realized that my future unborn grandchildren would never have a conversation like that. I want them to be able to have that conversation. And I said to her, that's great, because I'd written a PhD about oral history and interview methodologies and was very interested in interview methodologies. And I said, that sounds really interesting. How are you going to do that? And she said, I have no idea. I'm going to call IBM and Cisco, which she did, who didn't have an answer. And so we went on to create conversational video technology. But first, she started by taking Rose into a studio. I just found this video for a few days ago to share with you, where she asked her a bunch of questions using a 3D camera. That's two lenses to create a 3D image, a little bit like when you go to the movies and you see a 3D image, you put the glasses on. She filmed her in 3D and asked her a question, including, do you have hope? I'll just play the answer.
There is no guarantee for hope. Okay? Hope is in your way of life. It's the way you think. And there's just no guarantee. You just have to hope for the best and believe in it. There is no guarantee for hope.
I was going to stop her there. You get the idea. I put on the glasses. I thought it looked very interesting. She said, I don't like it. I don't press a button when I want to talk to you. I don't put on 3D glasses. I want this to be as if I'm in the room with her. And so that's when we, and her question at the time and that day was, how can we make technology more human? In fact, so it wasn't about using technology because it existed. And in fact, in this case, the technology didn't exist. It was, how can we think about the outcome that we want, which is a conversation with the past and with those who represent the past, and then develop the technology to fit it. In other words, have technology in service of the educational goal, not the educational goal in service of technology. We have something here. In other words, how do we get to authenticity, truth, and memory by using the technologies available to us and keeping those in front of us when we're doing this as an applied science? So in fact, what we're interested in is an AI, what we call authentic interactions. How do we create authentic content supported by technology? So if I was to show you this image of this Holocaust survivor testimony in 2012, it's a far cry from sitting by one's fireside with photographs of grandchildren talking about the past, when in fact he's surrounded by 6,000 LED lights and was asked 1,000 questions. This is Pinchas Gutter in 2012. In fact, this project, as you can see, was a highly technical project. Interestingly enough, as an interviewer, you can see the interviewer sitting just here, looking through a mirror at right angles to the interviewee, about 20 feet away. You would think there was nothing less intimate than that. But actually, when you're looking into that mirror and all you've got is my eyes and my face looking at his eyes and his face, I would say, as an oral historian, I've never had a more intimate interview with the interviewees. And if you think for a moment that this might be some kind of gimmickry, most interviews of the Shoah Foundation, the average interview length is 2 hours and 18 minutes. The average length of a Dimensions and Testimony interview is 18 hours. So you have multiple amount of content available, because now what happens is you can go deep into each subject, and it's not simply a narrative life history, but now it is exploring hundreds of questions that relate to an individual's life. 2016, Aaron Elster passed away very suddenly. There you can see him in Skokie, Illinois, the day that his interview was launched there. He's life-size on a screen there. It doesn't look as ghostly in real life. It's just the lighting is difficult to capture both the screen and the individual. Aaron passed away very suddenly. I was in Oxford that day, and I had my laptop with his interview. Now, I knew Aaron socially pretty well, but I was not his interviewer. And so I didn't know his story that, the depth of his story that well, just generally. And so that morning I put on my laptop, I put him on the screen at this conference in Oxford, and I suddenly realized I'm the first person that's going to ask a question of somebody who passed away. And so I asked him, what do you want your legacy to be? I should have got that in the slideshow here. He said something along the lines of, I want my legacy to be for young people to know that you don't know what life is going to throw at you. Sometimes it could be terrible, as I experienced, and at times it could be great. And I experienced that too. But the most important thing is to just keep going, because life is really worth living. And I went, oh, that's interesting. And so I kept asking him questions, and throughout the day, people came in and asked him questions. And Aaron, on the first day after he passed away, was fulfilling his legacy, because he had taken the time and trouble to answer those questions so that people, literally the day after he's died, could talk to him and gain wisdom and insight and knowledge and history. And so I was in touch with his son, Steven, and said to him, sorry, I can't make the funeral, but I want you to know that your dad had a really good day today. And so the memory that we take into the future is all going to be like this. That is not technically like this. It is all going to be a documentation of the past that we collect in the present, and that's now unavoidable. I'm not going to, Mrs. Rose, in the interview that she did, I'll leave the QR code so you can have a go with that. Just a couple more as we bring this to a close, a couple more examples of work that we've been doing using technology. This is Tell Me Inga. This is Inga Auerbacher, turning 90 years old on the 31st of December, still alive and well, living in Queens. And this is her in a studio with a stereo camera. You can see here the two lenses that are creating a 3D image of her talking on a green screen about her life and answering questions similar to the Dimensions and Testimony project, but this time it's for virtual reality. And so her 3D image gets placed into a 360-degree montage of her story, which is for younger children. Inga was 10 when she was deported to Terezin. In fact, no, she was 10 when she was liberated from Terezin. And so she tells her story through animated characters that are in a virtual space. But just like dimensions and testimony, you can ask her those questions and she will answer them. And so now we're able to bring, using technology, not only the story, but actually bring the program into a younger age group that is age appropriate and enables her to navigate the content. Also, using AI tools, we're able to put that content into multiple languages, which
जब मैं 2 साल का था तब मेरे पास सबसे कीमती उपहार थी मेरी गुड़िया मार्लिन। मुझे बाद में पता चला कि मॉडल का नाम
Dr. Bertha, how is her Hindi?
It's perfect except the gender thing.
Okay, we have to correct a little bit. So obviously Inga doesn't speak Hindi, but she does now speak Spanish and French and German, and she spoke German anyway, and a variety of languages, which we're able to use the AI tools to be able to extend that to new audiences.
जब मैं 2 साल का था तब मेरे पास
She doesn't want to stop that. But while we're on the topic of VR, one of the things that's happening is we are living in, I mentioned this before, that we don't know what's going to happen, which is going to complicate what we do. And the 7th of October has just complicated what we do, very much so. And so we're still coming to terms with that. What do we do with the fact that that has occurred, that we have a genocidal massacre perpetrated against Jews in Israel while we're teaching about the Holocaust? And at a time when that event is already being denied, has already been denied, that the young people that we're teaching in our museums and in our classrooms are subject to that denial and the anti-Semitism that goes with it. I've done what I usually do is I go to content and develop something called Survived to Tell Virtual Reality, which takes you to the sites of the various places. In fact, I have a clip for you, which I will share, just to give you an idea of what it would be like to use these technology tools to go to the places in which the events took place, much like we take people to Poland or to the various sites of Jewish memory today, 80 years later. What happens if you bring the site of this massacre into our classrooms and onto our campuses and complicate the way in which we talk about anti-Semitism and genocidal violence through actually experiencing it firsthand? This is tough to watch, but I'm just going to show you a quick clip here. You're inside the headset here.
We only had guns with minimum bullets. We start to yell to the citizens to run.
You can hear the whistle of the bullets, so you can tell they are shooting at you directly.
We heard them say, "Get up, get up, get up," in English. You.
Hamas terrorists had managed to open a small crack in the safe room door, and they are putting the barrel of the weapon inside and shooting inside, and she's hiding. She's about to die.
They knew that if they will see me, they will rape us.
So one of the things that I've been working on is how to do work in a transmedia context, well, by which we use a variety of different techniques and documentation methods. This is Milet Ben Chaim. She's returning to the site of the Nova Festival. She was hiding under that tree that's on the left-hand side behind her, and she is answering questions about what it means to go back there in real time. Bear in mind that while she is doing this interview, there's also a war going on right on that horizon behind her. But I'm just going to just ask her a quick question here to give an idea how that works. Are you angry
I get that question a lot. No, I'm not. I wasn't even during that day, and definitely not ever since. I'm sad and I'm frustrated and I'm hurt, but I'm not angry, and I definitely don't feel like we need to have revenge and we need to like make people pay. Like, no, we need love and light.
Kind of brings me back to where we started with Hella Goldstein. Millette is giving that testimony in the same way that Hella did. She's at the site with the gunfire going on behind her, but is courageous and brave enough to document it in real time and to place it into a media context where literally people on campus can, which is where this goes mainly, can have a conversation with her and learn from her as a human being about how she's seeing things and take it away from the overlay of the tension, the narrative tension, which is taking place in the political zone, and make it personal. We did work out how to do this, but I've forgotten how. I'm going to stop sharing and reshare. Give me one sec. Yeah, I'm sure how to get back here. Oh, there we go. So finally, I just want to show you one other thing in terms of the harnessing of technology. And this is where we can, everyone is thinking about how do we use AI, or how do we protect ourselves against AI? I spend most of my time thinking about how can I use it effectively. I'm just going to show you an app that I'm working on at the moment, which allows you to be able to create conversations similar to the holographic conversations, but now with experts. And so think about this, for example, for teacher training in the future. And I'll just show you this example. Well, here I am inside a little app that I'm creating. It enables you to ask questions. So for example, how do I teach young children about the Holocaust? Okay, so I'm going to get myself a bunch of questions about that, which the AI will generate for me. This will be starter questions that we can start with. Okay, I'm going to now save that. Let's go to answer that. I'm going to call it primary ed. Okay, save that set of questions. I'm going to go to my camera, and then I'm going to see primary ed there. What is the appropriate age to start teaching children about the Holocaust? So we're ready. We're going to record that. Well, actually, I don't think you can answer that question directly. The question is, what are you going to teach at what age? Because, of course, there are things that you could talk to a 5-year-old about what happens in a playground and exclusion of children that maybe are not like you, that would prepare them for what you might do later. So there's plenty one that can do at a very young age, as long as it's well thought out and age appropriate. So now when I go in here and ask what is the right age to teach the Holocaust, I should get, well, actually, I don't think you can answer that question directly. The question is, what are you going to teach at what age? So you can see there that you can use tools that are used, everything in that app is AI derived except for the video itself. But there are also use cases where today we can use the same deep faking technology that we saw earlier as a misuse of Barack Obama. I'm working with a Holocaust survivor right now. His name is Itzhak Adizes, and he has written many books about his life and his work. And he has done a Dimensions and Testimony interview with about 300 questions. But there's much more that he can talk about that he didn't have in his original interview. And so while we're not actually telling the story of the history of his Holocaust past, he is enabling us to use this AI technology to give reflections based on things that he's written in his books. Let me show you exactly how this works.
We all know that there is change. It started with the Big Bang and will continue as long as we exist.
The first step to be able to live at peace is to recognize that being different is acceptable. You don't have to be like me. We have to accept diversity, accept differences, rather than reject differences. All trouble starts when we do not accept somebody being different. We want them to be like me.
And so going back to our graph, what we see is we're about here right now. What I've just shown you severely complicates that. And we know that with what's going on in the world, with the development of technology, with the changes of methodology in education, with the ongoing thought about how Holocaust memory and indeed how Holocaust survivors will continue to contribute to what Holocaust memory is, it certainly won't look like that once we get to 2024, 2045. Some of my ideas about the trajectory of memory you can find in this book called The Trajectory of Holocaust Memory. And I think we have a few minutes for questions.